Cooperative Legacy Project interview number 76, May 17th, 2007. We're visiting with former Northern Electric Cooperative manager and 2006 Co-op Hall of Fame inductee Dennis Hagny. Dennis, where and when were you born?
I was born in Pierre, South Dakota, on April 2nd, 1943.
Okay. And where was your family originally from? Hagny sounds.
Yeah, I was born and raised on a farm and ranch in rural Potter County, southwest of Gettysburg, South Dakota. Mm-hmm. Actually, there's a community used to be there called Gorman, just off of Highway 83, and that's the Hagny area just to the east of Highway 83 there by the Gorman.
Okay. Was that an area that was hit pretty much by the Dust Bowl and so on? In the 40s?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, that was before my time, but lots of stories from my parents about that, yeah.
You want to relate any of them?
Well, my dad was a young man at that time, and he actually, he went with the CCCs for a time, and then he also went out to California and stuff and worked in orchards and vegetable growers and places like that just to get enough money to send home. And he actually, I think, the stories that were told, he actually kind of helped save his father's farm, which ultimately, became his brothers and him. But and then he went on from there and expanded on his own too. But the initial place, his father probably would have lost it if my father hadn't been able to generate some income somewhere and help hold on to it. But
what was your father's name?
Aaron Hagny.
Okay.
He was Aaron Hagny Jr. My grandfather was Aaron Hagny too.
Okay. Okay. Is Hagny, what nationality is that?
That's German.
German, okay.
And as far as we know, we're the only ones with that spelling that I've ever found anywhere. I've, was in the Army, and we've traveled a lot, and I've always looked phone books and different things, and never found Hagny anywhere. And it was just my dad and his brother. And Dad had 2 sons, and his brother has 1 son. Mm-hmm. And and then now I have 1 son, and my brother has 1 son. That's all that's left to carry on the name. So,
was that was there a more common version of the name, or?
Not really. They've spelled ours different times with an E in it, but I've never found that spelling anywhere else either. One of my aunts did some study of our genealogy or whatever, and I saw a postcard one time of was in a meat market or a merchant or a store, and it was a big brick building in Germany that had Hagny on it, spelled the way we spell it.
Okay.
That's the only other place I've ever seen it, I guess.
All right. Did your father farm then all the time?
Yes, farmed and ranched. Yeah.
Did he ever differentiate between the two of them? I remember attending a meeting out there one time where a woman got up and they were taking questions. It was a political meeting, and wanted to know what the biggest problem was, and her feeling was that people didn't know the difference between farmers and ranchers, that they were different.
No, when my dad was buying land and paying off the original mortgages, and he did anything, used anything that would make some money. I mean, he was in hogs at one time, and we milked cows when I was in high school yet. And those things, hogs and milking, were 2 things Dad never liked. He always liked the cattle end of it, but if it was going to help pay the bills, he did it at that time. So
diversification was a lot more common in those days.
Yeah, and probably more necessary than it is today.
Yep.
Although sometimes I think it might be necessary today too.
What was your mother's name?
Iverson.
And her first name?
Agnes.
Okay, and we want to talk about her a little bit.
Okay, sure. Her parents, my grandparents, and 3 of her siblings immigrated here from Denmark. And I think they originally stopped down around Gregory somewhere, I believe.
That's probably Iverson with an E then.
Yes, it is. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then they migrated to Potter County, and actually her home place was just a couple miles from where I grew up, and probably 4 miles from where my father grew up.
Okay. And
that was a fairly big family, and they were mainly cattle ranchers, cattle and horses. Mm-hmm. That was there. And her brother still lives on the home place.
Okay.
My mother, incidentally, still lives on
Really?
Where I grew up too, and she still has her cattle herd.
Ah, okay.
She's 84?
87.
87, yeah, excuse me, 87. She has a herdsman that he runs his cattle in with hers, and then he does haying and feeding and the heavy lifting and the fences and stuff like that, but she's still very active in the management. I mean, she goes to the sale barn, sells her calves, and buys replacement heifers and stuff like that. So she knows when they're calving. She knows which cows are having calves and stuff like that. So
that's interesting. That's unusual, I think.
She thinks she has to mow about 15 acres around the and her garden and flowers.
Does she have some help with that, or does she do that all herself?
She does that pretty much herself. That's kind of what I'm hoping to be in a little better position with. If we
You'll be a little bit
locate
closer
over there, I'll
out
be
there.
closer. Yeah, we'll only be about 10, 12 miles from the home place.
Yeah, okay. You have brothers and sisters?
I have one brother and 2 sisters.
Yeah. Where are they all at?
My brother is, he has a place right there by Gorman on that land. And
you say right there by is there something left of Gorman there? Or?
Not anymore. Well, there's some old steel bins there that were not originally part of Gorman, but they just burned down the Gorman elevator, the old wooden elevator. Just burned it down this winter. Yeah. So that landmark is gone. But
a lot of those landmarks disappeared.
Yeah. And then I have a sister that lives in Paradise Valley in Phoenix, and another sister lives in Bismarck.
Okay. What are some of your early memories out there? You said you were born in Pierre, but you grew up out there on the farm.
Right, yeah.
What was things like out there? We're probably talking around 1950 or so. I mean, they always say people don't remember much before they're about 9 years old, so what do you remember?
Well, it was a happy childhood, I guess. I've always appreciated growing up in the country, and there's a lot of. I was always interested in the wildlife and all that kind of stuff going on, and then of course, they taught you to drive when you were pretty young in those days. I can remember way back with my grandpa, and he didn't. I wasn't very old when he died, but I can still remember some times with him that with an old Chevy pickup and chasing skunks and stuff like that. But then later in my high school years, we had some real dry years and some tough times right in there, and that's kind of influenced my decision to not stay on the farm at the time, probably because I had a younger brother coming up behind me, and still two younger sisters at home, and so my father was in the prime of raising his family, and I at the time didn't think that it was probably desirable to try to make an income for 2 families off of that place.
Did he encourage you or discourage you in that?
He kind of kind of left it up to me. However, we did, a year or so after I graduated, I was doing some trucking and went out to get a load of sheep out at a place out by Sturgis, or actually by Newell. Nice, turned out to be a really nice ranch, and I got acquainted with the rancher, and his wife was a school teacher in Sturgis, but she had asthma real bad, and she was going to have to sell out and take her to a drier climate. I mean, that's pretty dry out there. But you had to go
drier than that.
Yeah, I had to go drier than that. So we kind of stayed in touch, and I went back out there and spent a week out there with him later and visited with him, and we kind of wound up putting it all together, and we had the FHA loans and everything all lined up, and our idea was that I would take the cattle out there, I'd winter the cattle out there, and then send the calves back to my dad where the feed was, and we'd kind of make a combined operation out of it. And then, so we got that all kind of put together, and I was supposed to take possession of it the first of that coming year. Well, it turned out that this guy's wife died about Thanksgiving time. Kind of, a surprise, and he really didn't want to sell anyway. I mean, he didn't want to. That was his home, and so we let him out of the deal. So that was so as close as I came. Yeah. So then I went back to school then, and then we wound up getting married, and in March of 1st of '65, we moved to Lamar's, Iowa, where I went to work for Plymouth Electric Cooperative.
Yeah. Did you ever think about how your life would have turned out differently but for that guy's wife dying?
Many times, yeah, and especially with Mary. She ran off, I guess, when we started talking about this. But we would have been 32 miles from the nearest town, which would have been Newell. But it was to me, I love the ranch country, I always have. That's another reason why we're kind of moving to the river breaks, but I've always loved those. And, I liked it out there, and it was a really nice place, set up on a bluff, and just had 9.5 miles of creek ran through it. But it was out in the middle of nowhere. Mary grew up in town. Her dad is Lyle Tennant, Tennant Trucking. He was, I don't know when he was, it was 20 years ago or longer, he was honored by the South Dakota Truckers Association and recognized, but he was in trucking over 60 years, I guess, but he's still got sons that are in it under his permits and stuff, or they don't need permits now, but under his name. But anyway, she grew up in Gettysburg, which still is pretty much country, but so it would have been an adjustment for her, but she was game for it. But yeah, we've wondered lots of times how our lives would have turned out.
Were your parents active in any cooperatives around in that Potter County area?
Yeah, they always supported the cooperatives there. The Farmers Union Oil Cooperatives was
in Gettysburg?
In Gettysburg. That's the one that I went to work for in 1960 when I was in high school.
Okay.
And that was my first touch of or involvement with cooperatives, I guess.
Okay.
But they did business with the Potter County Grain Co-op, and Dad was always a strong supporter of cooperatives and Farmers Union, particularly.
Let's backtrack a little bit. Since you ultimately got involved in rural electric cooperatives, do you remember getting electricity on the farm there?
Yes, I sure do. We got it in 1951. Yeah, we were late out in that country. Yeah, I remember living with, we had an old wind charger. It was on a big tower, and we had batteries in the basement. And didn't have much for lights in the outbuildings and stuff like that, Then when they built across the pasture from my uncle, they didn't come down the road; they just came right across the pasture. Yeah, and that was something. It really was.
I've interviewed people who talked about, when people first turned the lights on in their house.
Mm-hmm.
You had a little bit of. Did you have electric lights? From
Yeah,
the
we
wind
had
charger,
from the wind charger,
Yeah.
the DC
Mm-hmm.
system.
But you couldn't have handled all the appliances
No.
and so on
No.
off of that people had later on.
Right, that was the first thing people started buying. Was appliances.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And it took the water pump, the hand pump and stuff out of the house and put electric pumps in. And,
Mm-hmm.
then that's actually, I guess, when we moved the toilets indoors too.
Yes,
about the same time because you had water,
Mm-hmm.
to use. So.
Yep. How was your water out there? I talked to people in the rural water area too. And
we happened to have a real good shallow well on that place. Even going back before the folks bought it, it was recognized as a good well. A lot of people came there for water. But in later years, with livestock around there, and Dad fed cattle too for several years. It got to where it wasn't enough, and so then my uncle and he dug a real deep well just a mile west of east of our place on my uncle's farm, and then they piped that water. It's a warm water flowing well. It still is today, and they piped that water up through my mother's home place and his place, my uncle's, and then piped it over to my dad's and through all of our outbuildings and krills and into the house. Actually, we use it as a heat pump, warm water heat pump system. But that did contaminate the shallow well water then.
not as good at drinking water, maybe.
No, but now they have rural water with Mid-Dakota,
Yep.
so for the drinking water. But yeah, it was real high iron content, real red water.
Mm-hmm.
Nice and warm, and you didn't have to have any heaters, tank heaters or anything anymore. You just ran through the buildings. You had tanks in the different barn, places like that, corrals, and just flowed through and then went on down the creek. So it was always open, never froze.
Mm-hmm. What about school? Do you go to country school out there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I went all 8 years to Warren School.
Warren School.
Yeah.
Okay.
WARN, and Warren was my grandmother's maiden name.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And that was just about, 2 miles southwest of where I grew up. Southeast of where I grew up.
Mm-hmm. That's an experience that not very many kids have anymore these days.
That's true, yeah.
Was it worth it? Did you feel like you got a good education out there?
Yeah, I really did, and I did well, when I came into high school, too, and as far as passing the entrance tests, like with math and any of those kinds of things. So I got to go right into advanced math courses. Yeah, I had some very good teachers. Yeah, and those were good times, too. We had a lot of fun playing ball, and the kids all played together, and you had to. I mean, you wouldn't have a team otherwise. If you tried to just go with just your grade.
We hear stories about people getting caught out in blizzards at the country school. Did that ever happen to you?
Sure. Yeah.
Stay overnight there ever?
No, I don't recall ever staying overnight in the schoolhouse, but we stayed. There was a couple of places fairly close to the school that we stayed over at different times.
Mm-hmm.
And then I can remember other kids coming home with us because my dad wouldn't be able to get down there with a tractor or something and get us, and then they'd stay with us too, because they couldn't get. They were farther away.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of times I remember going to school riding on the back of the tractor, plowing the snow or through the snow. But
Okay. How about high school?
went to Gettysburg High School. Yeah, graduated in 1961.
Was that an adjustment going from country school into town? Gettysburg is not a huge city or anything, but
Right. Yeah, it was somewhat of an adjustment. You know, a little bit intimidating to all of a sudden be thrown in with a bunch of
did you have like classmates that went too? So
just one girl.
Okay.
But I had a neighbor's boy that was just a year older than I that went before me. He would have been a classmate in the country school, but he graduated a year before I did.
Yeah. Was it long after that that country school closed down?
Actually, no. All my siblings went there.
Okay.
Unless my youngest sister, I'm not sure she graduated from the 8th grade there. Yeah, I believe she did, though. And it continued to operate after that, so I bet it operated up to close to 1980 anyway.
Okay.
Gee, I wish I could remember for sure when they closed that. My mother was a school teacher before she got married. Well, even for a little bit afterwards, and then she was always on that school board, and she was one of those that fought consolidation. But which it's not hard to understand. People hate to give up their schools, and I mean we're seeing it now even in the small towns, small schools, and
a lot of controversy about that issue. Always has been. You first get involved with a cooperative working at Gettysburg at the Farmers Union Oil Company. What were you doing there that summer? That'd be, I think you said, what, 1960?
Yeah, 1960 when I was a junior in high school. I started there. I wound up doing practically everything. I kind of started doing books and just service station attendees and stuff like that. But then that summer I took the farm tire truck, which wasn't as sophisticated as they have nowadays. We just had two 55-gallon barrels for the and a paddle pump for the fluid and an old hand breaker to try to break the beads on the tractors. But I did the farm tire, tractor tire work, and just wherever I was needed, and kept the books at the same time. And then the guy that hired me was Gordon Jensen, was the manager at that time, and he was one of the last of the commissioned managers in Farmers Union. And I guess it wasn't, well, Senex, at that time was trying to get this commission managers kind of worked out of the system. Yeah,
I've interviewed some guys who did that, the managers.
Yeah. So anyway, they kind of were able to successfully get to do that and got him out. And then they hired a guy that was not really qualified, just as kind of an interim manager. I wasn't 21 yet, but anyway, they asked me to kind of show him the ropes and keep an eye on things. So I kind of was like an assistant manager or something for a while. Okay. And then John Bonenkamp came in, and he was a Senex field man during that time, and he came in then as manager, and then that's when I left, and I went to work for the State Highway Department that summer, and then went to school that fall. But
okay, that's kind of ironic. I think I interviewed a guy just yesterday who was going to interview for that job at Gettysburg.
Really?
In about that time,
Yeah.
and he ended up taking the job at Dakota.
Okay.
Instead, and was there 23 years.
Yeah. That is interesting.
Yeah. Yep. So you had your experience out in the Newell area, and then you decided to go to college.
Yeah. We got married that year, and we'd been going together for a long time and engaged. But we got married in December '64, and my wife was going to Vermilion then, and then prior to that, I had started at Nettleton Business College in Sioux Falls, and then when the ranch thing kind of came together, when we thought we were going to be taking possession, then I left that. But anyway, then after that all played out, and we moved down to Vermilion after we got married. And I was going to start college in Vermilion the second semester, but while I was waiting, I answered an ad in the Sioux Falls Argus Leader for an accountant and didn't know what it was or anything else. So it turned out to be Plymouth Electric Cooperative, and the office manager, Weston Carr, and his wife came over and interviewed Mary and I in Vermilion and hired me, and so that's how I wound up at Mars. And then later I went back to school on the GI Bill because my career got interrupted for a while with the activation of our National Guard unit in the Mars, and I wound up in Vietnam.
Oh, you did? Okay. You want to talk a little bit about that? This would have been what year?
We got activated in April of 1968.
Okay.
And then we got sent to Fort Carson, and the unit stayed in Fort Carson, but then they started calling us up as individual replacements. And I got orders in December of '68 to go to Vietnam. And so I was in Vietnam, got home early December of '69.
So about a year.
Yeah.
Was that about a standard tour of duty over there?
I would have had a standard tour, but they deactivated our unit in November of '69. So the unit came back from Fort Carson, but those of us that, depending on when we went over, we didn't come back from Vietnam till December. But
did they take full units over there, or did they just take a few people?
At that time, they just took individual replacements.
Not like
we were just
the
part
current
of
conflict.
Yeah, my DDS 214 reads so many. Well, actually, it's 2 periods of active duty, 6 months basic training, and then I had 19 months of active duty with the Army. So when they took me as an individual replacement, then I was part of the Army. I was not a National Guardsman anymore.
Yeah. What unit were you in over there then?
I was in the 20th Engineers.
Okay.
In Dongtam.
Yeah. Where was that at?
Way down in the Delta.
Okay.
On the Mito River, farthest kind of permanent base or camp that we had down in the Delta, farthest south.
Was there much combat around there?
Yeah, there was a fair amount. There was quite a bit of problems during the '68 TET, and then there was a little bit in the '69. But we had the town of Mito, they said was a Viet Cong R&R center. So we had South Vietnamese working on the base and stuff, but they were also given coordinates and stuff to their buddies. That we got mortared a lot. They mortared us at night a lot, and we caught them sometimes stepping things off and stuff like that. But then there was also for a time there was a unit of the Brownwater Navy that patrolled the Mito River stationed there. They got shot up pretty bad sometimes. And then we had some air cav units there for a time too. So when we'd get mortared at night, then the Cobras and the gunships would go out and just blow the heck out of where they thought the mortars came from. And so we'd have.
They use any Agent Orange around there?
Well, they, not that I knew of while I was there, but they did to clear the jungles and stuff before, because on the berms and stuff that was all clear, and so and when pulled guard duty, you could see where they had cleared the jungles back and stuff, but I didn't have to go out much. I wound up being a mess sergeant there, and so about the only time I went out was if I went with a truck to go get supplies somewhere up to Donsanuk or somewhere like that.
But it was kind of like the current situation, at least in that it was difficult to tell friends from foes.
Yeah, absolutely. Every night when we helped load the civilians up that worked in the mess hall and worked in the all around the compound, we had to search them. We had to make sure they didn't plant something on the truck that was going to haul them back to their village. And like I said, we always had to keep an eye on them because sometimes we'd catch one stepping things off. And
would they occasionally set off a grenade and blow themselves up too?
We never had any experience with that there. Although we had a young one throw a grenade into the back of a truck as it was coming into the compound one time.
Yeah.
Fortunately, it wasn't our truck, but it was one of our units. Like I said, I was with the engineers, and they built roads. They had heavy equipment.
Yeah. What was the morale situation like over there? By 68, 69, you'd been there. They'd been over there for a while, and
it was pretty good, I guess. We played a lot of volleyball and horseshoes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Showed movies between the
any of the
bunkers
USO
and the barracks
groups. Did
stuff
Bob Hope get down to your area at all?
No, not while I was there. Not to Dongtown. They were in the country different times, but they never got down there. They were north of us. Morale was good, but everybody was counted the days all the time on that tour and marked them off on the calendars. So everyone was glad to to go home.
So you get home in 1969, almost 1970.
Yeah, December '69. Yeah, got home early '69, so I was home for Christmas. And then I got released then too.
Okay. Well, you're married. You get what about kids?
Yeah, we have 2 children, a boy and a girl.
Where are they?
They're
at?
both in Denver, and we have 3 grandchildren and 1 on the way.
Okay.
Yeah, my daughter works for the Arapahoe County court system. She's a technology coordinator for about, I think she's got 8 or 9 courthouses in that district, and she works for the judges and the court system. And my son is a broadcast engineer with Comcast.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
How long did you work at Lamar's for the co-op there?
Until 1974, summer of '74. Started there the 1st of March '65, and then left there in summer of '74.
Was that entire time as bookkeeper and so on?
Yeah, I started out as a work order accountant, and then got promoted to the office manager when the office manager was promoted to the general manager. So I was office manager when I left there and went down to Greenfield, Iowa in '74 as the general manager there.
Okay. Who was the manager at Lamar's when you were there?
Well, Weston Carr was the one that hired me.
Yeah.
He was office manager at the time, and then he became the manager.
Yeah, okay. Okay.
Before that, yeah, thank you, dear. Pete Forsberg was the manager when I went there originally.
So
A.M. Forsberg.
So comes 1974, and I imagine you were kind of happy to get back to South Dakota, or
Well, in 1974, I went down to Greenfield.
you went to Greenfield in '74. Okay.
Yeah, that was my first CEO or general manager's job.
Okay. Now, was that a smaller co-op? Or?
Actually, no. It was bigger. Actually, even bigger than Aberdeen, than Northern. Before we merged, before Northern merged, but no, it was a pretty good size. It was 5,000 consumer cooperative, which is fairly good size for Iowa because
Places are closer together.
Yeah, there was like one time there was 55 rural electric cooperatives in Iowa.
Have they had mergers down there like?
They have had. Yeah. But it was a real good experience. I enjoyed being there, and had a good board, progressive board, good employees, and I think we accomplished a lot of things there too. And
he was the youngest manager in the nation when he took that job.
Oh yeah, I forgot that. Just for a little while.
Yeah,
that's right, it was.
Next year
a year later, I was 31, wasn't I? Yeah, I was 31. I got it on my. Carl Gilman, president of the board, called me on my birthday, right? And when I was my 31st birthday. Yeah.
Okay.
And we enjoyed it there. It really did. Greenfield is a smaller town, but it was a county seat town. We served 4 counties. We served the bridges of Madison County.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Covered bridges, huh?
Yeah.
I'll be darned.
And it's just neat country down in there, and good people. And we were real active in the community there too, and it was like all small county seat towns of 2,500 or so. They were all trying to find ways to grow and prosper, and so we were active in economic development and that sort of thing.
What was the nearest big town down there?
Well, Des Moines was like 54 miles away, I guess. Creston, Iowa was bigger. It was, I suppose Creston's about 4,500, 5,000 maybe. That was just south of us, about 15, 20 miles.
Okay. So then what year is it that you got the job offer up here?
Okay, and
was it an offer, or did you get was it an opening up here?
There's the NRECA publishes a magazine. You're aware of that, and they publish job openings or career openings in the back of that magazine all the time. Well, in 1981, my dad had a heart attack, early 81, and about that same time, I read the ad for Northern Electric Cooperative in Aberdeen, South Dakota. So I told my board down there that I was going to come up. Well, I sent an application in, and I got invitation for an interview. And my dad was experiencing some procedures and some kind of tough times in Sioux Falls. So we were back and forth to Sioux Falls quite a bit, and then I told my board then down there that I was going to come on up to Aberdeen and take a look at this just to see. I said, I don't think anything will come of it, but it's within 100 miles of where I grew up, and if maybe if I've got some more, if I'll have some more years to spend with my father, and It'd be kind of nice to be maybe closer.
Mm-hmm.
So I said I was going to look at it, and they said that's fine, and they actually gave me told me to leave the room, and came back and they gave me a big raise. Said just to keep that in mind,
Yeah.
just to make it more difficult, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so then we came up here and we interviewed, and by that time Dad had gotten back to Gettysburg to the farm, so we went from here over there, and while I was over there, I got a call from the president of the board here, and they
Mm-hmm.
offered me the job. So then we had to make a decision, and it was interesting ride back to Greenfield, Iowa, wasn't it, Mary? Trying to decide, do we really want to do this or don't we? Because we were happy down there. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
they were good to me.
Yep.
Ultimately, we decided to come. And
Some people move a lot, and some people it takes a little bit to get them to move.
yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Who was on the board up here at that time when you took the job? Do you remember?
Yeah, if I can remember them all. It was Dennis K. Larson,
Mm-hmm.
Bob Borchard, Clarence Erickson, Connie Everson, Don Shauneman.
Mm-hmm.
Is that 5 or 6?
Did you say Johnson?
Oh, Robert Johnson. Yeah, he's
I've
probably
interviewed
recognize his name.
Yep.
Let me think here. Where do I?
I've had the majority of those guys on Washington fly-ins.
Oh, I bet you have too. Let's see, someplace here we've got it. Oh, Jerry Martella,
Mm-hmm.
Arthur Beck, Merrill Heatman.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I mentioned Clarence Erickson, Don Shauneman, Connie Everson, Bob Borchard, Jerry Martella, and Robert Johnson. Yep,
Mm-hmm.
and Dennis K. Larson.
Yeah. Okay. What as you get into the job up here, what kind of issues were you dealing with here at that time, other than the normal day-to-day things in a rural electric, which are what?
Well, I don't know how much you know about the history of Northern Electric and the previous manager.
If you want to talk about it, okay.
Well, anyway, he kind of got in trouble with a faction of the membership.
Mm-hmm.
And then November before I came here, he kind of had a pretty hot annual meeting, I guess.
Mm.
And he volunteered that he would retire. And I guess the story went that he didn't really think the board would hold him to that.
Mm.
But there had at that election, they elected a kind of a newcomer to the board that was purposely sent in there kind of to try to clean house, and so they kind of held the board or held him to that promise to retire.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, in his defense, the guy was a good engineer. He was a good manager. He just didn't treat people very well. Didn't treat his employees very well, and he didn't treat the members. He forgot that they owned the cooperative. And because he had built a good system and so forth, the board had supported him, but the membership got down on him because he was unapproachable. He was just difficult to And so then a faction of them, which kind of grew out of the old United Family Farmer group, kind of got organized and put the pressure on him they got a member on the board, and then at that annual meeting then put the pressure on him to retire.
Mm-hmm.
It was an annual meeting that...
was that involved a little bit with the Oahe issue then too?
Well, the United Family Farmers were very much involved with Oahe, and that's when they were originally organized.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But then
was John C. involved in this?
Mm-hmm. John C. was, and Clarence Erickson was one of his lieutenants. But there was others. Actually, Bob Borchard was also very active in the anti-Oahe,
mm-hmm.
and
mm-hmm.
was a John C. lieutenant, one of his lieutenants too. And Bob was on the board, but Bob he supported the prior manager and so forth. He also was more open, I guess, to maybe it was time for a change, and it was time really for him to retire anyway. So Bob was a very strong supporter of hiring me when I came, and they all were, but
mm-hmm.
but anyway, that faction was because the old board had been slow to change things, I guess, in their minds anyway. They kind of worked for the next several years to remove that board, the board that hired me, with the exception of Clarence.
Mm-hmm.
And so right away it became very obvious to me that there was a split in the board, but it was kind of 1 against 8.
Mm-hmm.
And like when we go to meetings or something, like a pier or something, the 7 or 8 of them might, or however many were down there, might have a little get together or something in their room, but they excluded Clarence kind of, and so then for the next several annual meetings they went through a process of kind of getting the people in there that this organized group wanted. So it kind of changed the board, but during that period we had a very divided board.
Yeah.
And the new ones were suspicious that there was a lot of things, wrong with the cooperative and all that, which then in time, after they got on there, some of them realized there wasn't any issues anymore and
mm-hmm.
became real good, solid, supportive board members too. But I guess the question you asked me, what was my experience, was that political situation with the board politics,
mm-hmm.
and I tried to stay absolutely out of it, and I wouldn't have survived if I hadn't.
Mm-hmm.
And even through the course of that, there was even times where if somebody lost, they thought that I maybe had some influence, and sometimes blamed me, but found out in the end that I didn't.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway.
Were you fully aware of all this when you took the job?
No, I wasn't at all. Not when
mm-hmm.
I applied for it or interviewed for it. It was only after I came up here that then.
Did you have second thoughts when you got into realize what was going on?
Yeah, for a while, a few years there, it was uncomfortable. I mean, it was. And
did you also have to worry about repairing the relationship with the employees? Were they?
Yeah. Yeah, that wasn't too difficult for me because I've always believed that. Well, first of all, I've always believed that the cooperative belonged to the members, and they could use the cooperative to do
mm-hmm.
provide whatever services they wanted.
Yep.
But also, we were only as good or bad as our employees in the way we treated people, and so I've always been a really member service oriented type manager, and believed in treating the employees good too. And the employees were scared. They were scared to death of
mm-hmm.
what had happened and what might happen, and so I had to restore their confidence and their faith, and also had to rebuild a relationship with the membership, because a part of the membership thought the co-op was very, very unresponsive and negative on
a
everything.
slow process to get everybody back together again. Did it help that the Oahe project, that issue went away finally? Or were these personality conflicts that continued after that?
Yeah, and there's still some of that today that exists in Brown County politics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, that made it probably take a longer time for everybody to get comfortable that Northern Electric was there. You know, the people in charge or responsible for the operation of Northern Electric and so forth were recognized that it was their co-op, and we were there to serve them, and that was our purpose. And eventually they came to trust that was the case. But
and at the same time, you're dealing with these local issues around here. How were you involved with some of the more national issues that that parallels to the rural electric system? Was it kind of hard to focus on those things when you were dealing with the issues at the local level?
Well, yeah, I guess I don't know that I did focus on those things too much. You know, I kind of had to earn the respect of the South Dakota Rural Electric family, both at the G&T level, at the East River level, and the South Dakota Rural Electric Association.
What was their attitudes toward all the stuff that was going on up here? I know East River was kind of pro-Oahe.
Yeah, and that put this faction against East River. So
my first boss at Farmers Union.
Yeah, there was a lot of animosity between Northern Electric and East River because of that. And well, that I started to tell you about that annual meeting that before I came here in November of '81. They had more managers visited Northern Electric's annual meeting than it ever had anywhere in the state. People, they just came to watch the fireworks, I guess. Is what they told me about anyway. So I don't know exactly when I first got involved more into. Well, I started getting offices in East River, of course, Managers Association, and a statewide. And then I ran for CFC, for the CFC board, National Rural Utilities Finance Cooperative, in 1993. And at that time, you had to get nominated. And you ran at the district level, which our district was North and South Dakota and Minnesota. So we ran at the district meeting, and the top two candidates then got put on the ballot, and the election was on the national level. Well, it turned out that I tied with a guy from North Dakota, and we broke the tie with straws, and he won it, and so he got placed on the ballot, top name on the ballot. Well, on the national level, the delegates, the director delegates that attend the national meeting, they don't really know you, so we had to go down to the national meeting and campaign and all that kind of stuff. But usually what happened was they usually checked the top one, because they knew that was supposedly the top vote getter from each district. So I didn't win then, but it was a good experience.
Yeah.
And later I was appointed to the Unity Task Force, NRECA's Unity Task Force, and also the competitive. NRECA's Advisory Task Force on Competitiveness and the Unity Task Force and the Issues Committees. Served on them, and then I got appointed to the Standing Committee on Telecommunications, and I wound up chairing that for a few years.
Okay.
And then I guess that would be the involvement with the national.
Mm-hmm.
And I was involved with some other things in South Dakota here, but I don't know how much you want to get into all that, but
Whatever you want to talk about.
well, I was a founding board member of the Rural Electric Economic Development Inc. READ Revolving Loan Fund,
Okay.
which was created in the East River family.
Mm-hmm.
And
Was that involved with somewhat in assisting maybe some of the early on rural ethanol development?
yeah, we did. Yeah.
How important do you think that is for these areas? It's certainly grown a lot in recent years.
Well,
It was kind of a hump to get over, and then it.
Yeah. I think value-added agriculture was absolutely the way to go, and deserved the promotion that it got and the involvement. We belonged to ACE right from the very beginning, American Coalition for Ethanol. I think there's, as with all things with agriculture, in fact, we just listened to what's that radio show, Mary? Ag Talk that we listen to all the time with Ed.
I can't say.
But anyway, can't think of the name of it now. But they had both sides of the cattle feeders side and the corn growers, National Corn Growers Association side of the ethanol support and subsidies and all that. There's some things that are going to have to be worked out, I suppose, to make so everybody profits and prospers by it. But I think it's a good thing that this country's doing that. Then I was also a founding board member of the SDREI, South Dakota Rural Enterprise Inc. And also a member of the Northeast Board of Governors, Northeast Board of the Governor's Office of Economic Development, and I was chairman of the Aberdeen Development Corporation. So those were some of the things that I guess I was involved with in economic development. But
in the East River area, the rural electrics have been more involved, perhaps, and they haven't necessarily everywhere in the country with regard to supporting value added, haven't they?
Yeah, early on, yeah.
I think if you get out in the western part of the state, I'm not sure that Rushmore has been as involved.
No, that's true. But that's even, there's kind of East River and West River politics involved there too.
Yeah.
Kind of the rancher against the grain farmer. A little bit.
I'm kind of scanning questions here and jumping over something about we've already answered. But I guess one of the things I talked recently, I did an interview this spring with Bob Rademacher down at Huron. I think he just recently retired. He was still managing when I interviewed him. He was about a month ahead of retirement then.
So I wasn't sure. I guess I hadn't heard whether he retired 1st of May or 1st of June or when.
It was about the 1st of May. It seems like it was just a couple of weeks ago that they were having an open house out there, and I was out of town that day, so I missed that.
I know I got an invitation to the statewide summer managers meeting, and they're going to honor him at that. So
yeah. One of the things I visited with him about were some of the storms and how the system had to react to them. Did you have to deal with that up here too? The lines down and that kind of thing.
Yeah, we did at different times. Actually, the one that happened the fall after I retired in April would have been the fall of '05, right after Thanksgiving.
Yeah,
that was probably one of the worst ones. So I kind of missed out on that. In fact, we were gone the whole week. We left here on the Sunday, and that storm came in that Sunday night. I think we just happened to go down to Branson.
Oh,
that
okay.
time. But prior to that, over the years, we'd had windstorms and tornadoes and ice storms and stuff too. But
sure,
this is not as bad of an icing area as like where I came from in Iowa.
Yeah, yeah. Has flooding ever been an issue? I know that you've just recently had some flooding around here. Does that create problems for the rural electric up here too?
Yeah, at different times we had in specific places. Like we had to relocate to Hecla substation after the 96, 97 spring thaw from 100 inches of snow. And in places where we had to rock in poles and stuff like that, or move lines completely because it's too wet.
Yeah. Is that difficult to maintain service under those circumstances when water comes up and doesn't go down again?
Yeah, although one thing that as I mentioned, the previous manager had engineered a pretty good system, I think, in Northern Electric, and but I continued that with a desire of having all of our substations looped and as many lines as we could loop, so you could always backfeed and stuff. So we had a good record of reliability, real high record. And then once we merged with Spink in 1997, then we just continued to rebuild that system, and under the same philosophy that we wanted to improve the...
How did that process of merging with Spink work for you? Almost every co-op, it seems, has had to deal with merger in one area or another. Was it difficult at all?
Not terribly difficult, but there are always a number of issues you have to deal with.
Size-wise, how would they compare to the northern here?
They were considerably smaller, probably a fourth our size in terms of members, and I don't know if they were even 20% in terms of load, because we serve a lot of Aberdeen. Yeah. A lot of commercial and industrial. All the industrial stuff east is all in ours. We've helped develop some of those parks out there during my career. So we had a lot more load than they did, and probably we kind of used in terms of how we set up the governance and so forth, we considered them a third of, and in the old Northern 2/3. So out of a 9-member board, the Articles of Merger gave them 3 seats on the board.
Was that an expanded board, or
no? In fact, both boards, I think, need to be commended for downsizing as fast as they did. We merged in May of 97, and they agreed in the Articles of Merger that they would all stand for election at the first annual meeting following the merger, which would have been September. And so they did, all those that wanted to run again. And then they went from 18 members down to 9 right away.
Okay. And they had, both boards had been 9 before.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Did they have like districts or anything?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Both co-ops had districts, but we redistricted, and that was also part of the plan of merger.
Mm-hmm.
And then once the election at that first annual meeting, then they drew straws to see whether they got 1 year, or 2 year, or 3 year terms. So that's how we got them back to the staggered terms, so they didn't all come up for election every year after that.
Hmm.
We approached the studies kind of by using the financial forecast model that REA requires us to do whenever we make a loan application, and it's a favorite tool of mine. I always did one every year anyway, just it forecasts everything for 10 years ahead,
Mm-hmm.
and it gets into a lot of detail, and you actually create a balance sheet for the end of all the future years, operating report and balance sheet, and it ties in with all the loan programs and everything. So what we did was we did a financial forecast for Spink Electric, continuing the next 10 years on its own, and we did one for Northern Electric going on its own for the next 10 years, and then we did a combined one, and we tried in the set of assumptions we tried to figure out what would the combined co-op ultimately, how many employees would it have, and what of course revenues you can project and expenses and pretty much, but you try to see where there would be savings and where there wouldn't be savings and so forth. There's not a lot of operational savings in a merger,
Mm-hmm.
because you still got that many miles of line to take care
Yeah.
of and that many
Yeah.
services to maintain.
A little different than some other operations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also because we cared about the employees and so forth, both boards were in agreement with that no employee would lose their job as a result of the merger or take a cut
Mm-hmm.
as a result of the merger, but there was a goal for the size of the new organization, and we would get there through attrition or
Mm-hmm.
people that would move on to something else or something. But
Did you continue to maintain an office down in Redfield?
yes, we did. Yeah, and it became a kind of a member services and maintenance, and then we actually built a new building down there, new member service outpost.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that made it easier for the employees down there,
Mhm.
who probably felt a little bit intimidated initially, being the
Yeah.
smaller of the two.
Yeah, probably did, but they quickly embraced our philosophy, I guess, and
Mm-hmm.
they were happy and anxious, I guess, to improve services and so forth down there. Right away, we always provided good equipment and stuff too, and
Mm-hmm.
so right away they got some new equipment and
Mhm.
stuff like that.
Mhm.
That was good for morale. And
Yeah. You
some
mentioned
promotions, too.
the expansion on the industrial area out here on the east side of Aberdeen. Did you have to deal at all with the territorial integrity issues, trying to determine who was going to provide service, whether it would be the investor-owned utility or the rural electric? That was still an issue down at Huron when the turkey plant was established down there just a couple of years ago. So those kind of things are still kind of fought out. Was it a struggle for you?
Well, when I first came here, this was a real battleground, Northern Electric and Northwestern Public Service at that time, back when the territorial law was passed in 1973, I believe.
Yeah.
And then the PUC was given the task of assigning the territories, and the maps and everything were filed. Well, that was hotly contested up here, and went to went all the way to the Supreme Court, some of the things. And when I came here, there were still some issues that hadn't been heard by the Supreme Court. So I was involved in that early on, and finally getting some of those resolved, and some trades that were ordered back that by the PUC that both sides contested, and we finally got all that worked through. But then, because it was so contested up here, it was something that was watched very close by both Northern Electric and Northwestern on any new customers, any new service areas, or new developments. We got along pretty good with management here, and if it was in our service area, it was fine. If it was in their service area, it was fine. We didn't try to steal from each other anymore. Back before everything was set into law and assigned, there was what they called spite builds and stuff done at night and so forth to capture territory, and that's kind of because of the previous manager's actions there. That's kind of why Northern wound up with some of the territory that they do have. That's probably really in close to Aberdeen, contrary to some of the other communities where the boundaries were set, given a pretty good margin to the private power companies around the towns. And in Aberdeen, we were pretty well integrated before they had the task of assigning the territories. So, but then, other than like I said, we got along okay as long as the boundaries were clear, and we didn't try to steal from each other. But whenever there was a large load of 2 megawatts or bigger, then those we were both actively involved in courting them to petition the PUC for election of power supplier. And we tried, as you know, very hard to get the turkey plant too, and so
yeah.
Not to get it away necessarily from Dakota Electric, but we wanted it located in this community.
Yes. How was the relationship with the proposed beef plant up here? Has Northern Electric been involved in that issue at all?
Yeah, and Northern has been supportive of it.
That's post your retirement, or is it?
Yeah.
That's been going on. Okay.
Although I got a call from the executive VP of the Development Corporation the other day, and back when we were courting the turkey plant, Webb Water, Kurt Hone, and myself and Northern Electric, and the development, Jim Barron of the Aberdeen Development Corporation, we because the city would step up to the plate and make a commitment for wastewater, we agreed to build a wastewater plant for the turkey plant, Webb and Northern Electric. So he called the other day because I guess the builders of the beef plant are planning to build their own $10 million wastewater plant, but he was just kind of wondering again and I guess Kurt had talked to him too about, is that maybe the city ought to look at doing something in cooperation with them to kind of get in a better position here for future plants. Maybe this would be the time for them to look at it, expanding the plant, and so they would be ready.
Okay, where exactly around Aberdeen is that supposed to be built at? I've kind of followed it a little bit online and the debates and the election up here and everything, but
it's just south of town.
It's
right close to the wastewater plant,
okay.
South of Aberdeen. Yeah.
Okay. I guess one of the questions I've asked some of the folks who've been involved in rural electrification, do you think that without the rural electric program that electricity would have been provided ultimately to farms and ranches in South Dakota, or do you think they'd have been stuck with wind chargers? in the outlying areas. I'm sure right
Well,
around town maybe things
yeah.
would have been different, but
It would have been very slow coming to the rural areas. Ultimately, I suppose, probably eventually there would have, but although it's still low density service, I mean, especially you go farther west, you can really see that.
mm-hmm.
The township that my home place is in,
Yeah.
there's only about 3 or 4 families, and they're not really. My mother's a widow, and I mean there's her and my aunt and uncle.
Mm-hmm.
That's 3, and then I think there's one other couple. So there's 5 people in that township,
Yeah.
and so it's if you thought about building a line out to those people, it'd be awful hard to make it profitable. It'd take a
Yeah.
long time.
Yeah. And the rates
And-
would have been
yeah.
prohibitive probably.
Yeah, and if you go back and look at the history of REA, when Roosevelt created it, it was offered to the investor-owned utilities first as a low-interest loan program. Governments cost them money, but
Mm-hmm.
which was 2% at that time, and there wasn't any takers. Well, I shouldn't say any. I guess there was one somewhere in the nation that did build a little bit of rural line, but it's hard to say ultimately what would have happened, but it would have taken a long time if it hadn't been for the creation of the local rural electric cooperatives.
Do you think maybe people ought to be more appreciative of the co-op system too, as they see the financial misadventures of some of the private utilities companies like Enron and even Northwest?
Absolutely, and I think some of the criticism the rural electric program has gotten over the years as being government and all that, the people, those critics should have a better understanding of the rural electric program.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, definitely, I didn't create it, but I latched on to the phrase early in my career, owned by those we serve,
Mm-hmm.
and I've always used that in all any writings and annual reports and any speeches or anything I've ever given, because I firmly believe that it is, and and our government involvement was simply as a borrower. We borrowed from the government. It wasn't built with grants, or wasn't operated with any subsidies. But there's a number of critics that don't understand that. And I think, yes, as from a consumer, and we saw that happen with with the Enron events and so forth, that in some, in New York City, for example, and other places, there were cooperatives created, electric utilities created because of they wanted to have a utility that was there to serve them, and that was their total mission.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How important do you think cooperative education is for both the staff of a cooperative and the membership? And then, of course, you're also probably doing an educational mission to those outsiders, those critics, maybe those legislators in Pierre and Washington who may not totally understand.
And every opportunity you have, whether it's service clubs or wherever, I think there's every time you have an opportunity or a chance to educate people, even if it's at a social event, when they start criticizing the program or whatever, you have a chance to enlighten them. Mm-hmm. You need to take that chance. But we very much believed in supporting the education of the young people and stuff too. And our members too. We've sponsored 2 bus loads every year up to Basin Electric to look at those facilities, and always sponsored young people to the South Dakota excursion, rural electric excursion, and then also 1 or 2 of them to the national program.
Mm-hmm.
But annual meetings and member meetings and any chance I had or we had in our newsletters and annual reports and so forth. We used those opportunities to educate our membership as well.
Mm-hmm. As you have a chance to observe cooperatives around the country, do you think sometimes it's possible for a co-op to get off track, for example, about what its mission is? And
mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's possible, and I guess that's kind of what they were accusing the prior manager of here, because he kind of forgot it was the members' cooperative.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And there's been some larger, maybe more on the G&T side that have gone astray too, and tried to. In fact, I spoke at a regional meeting one time about, and I took the opposing view. Well, I mentioned that in my talk down at the. So I guess I've already told you about that, but.
If you want to retrace your remarks,
okay.
Go right ahead.
Okay. Well, anyway, it was just a two-man panel. Actually, it was just two. Each one of us gave our opinion, but he was advocating at the time that cooperatives break their contracts with their G&Ts and be able to go out and buy on the market wherever they could, and the kind of the vertical integrated system of cooperatives that wasn't all that important, to remain steadfast and so forth. And if you could get a cheaper price for insurance, get your insurance from somebody else, and you didn't have to stay with Federated Rural Electric or whatever. I took the opposing viewpoint to that and said we were staying with our cooperative partners that we helped create and that we trusted, and in the long run, I think we'd all be better off for it. So, and it proved out to be that way too.
In parts of the country, I'm not sure that that's necessarily happened in South Dakota, although I guess it has in the rural telephone area, because I talked to a manager who was upset about it, or a retired manager. What's your take? Is it kind of the move to privatize? Is that kind of dissipated with the financial misadventures we've been talking about?
Yeah, I think I haven't heard too much about that in recent years.
Yeah, they kind of backed off on that. We heard a lot about that for a while.
Right.
And if members were confronted with somebody offering them a bunch of money,
there was some buyouts, and a few that took place, and there was offers being made. But I hadn't heard too much about that even in probably the year or so before I retired. It kind of quieted down with, I think, the scandals and stuff that come along.
Just have a few questions left here. One that I've just kind of recently added. Looking back over your career, what has been your biggest disappointment? Is there, or has there been one?
I can't really think of any right offhand, I guess.
And then the opposition question is, what achievement are you most proud of? What thing that you accomplished did you think you first think of when you think about stuff that you were proud of doing?
We got involved in a lot of things, as you probably already know. But it was exciting when we created NRC TV. Because back at that time, that was before the small dish, and so the only option people had in the country was one or two off-air stations, and maybe one of them was halfway decent, and the other two or so were pretty snowy. Or a big dish, a C-band
and those things were kind of expensive.
Yeah, and they had some problems with them too. and then they had to buy programming with them, of course.
Yeah.
So when we created that, the day we launched, it was just like a carnival in the office. People came in all day long, and they were seeing we had it set up in the office, and they were looking at it, and then instead of waiting for us to come out and install the equipment and stuff for them, a lot of them just said, well, I'll just take it home and I'll experiment with it. I'll see if I can install it myself. And people were really, really excited about that, and until it really grew. I mean, and we got a lot of national attention. I even went to an institute out at, to a conference out at the Aspen Institute, and put on a presentation out there about microwave television and what we were doing. And then also, at the same time we did that, wasn't too long after that, they created a North Central Area Interconnect, which was 8 schools that were looking for ways to set up interactive classrooms. And so I went to them, and to Leighton Getty was the head of it, and offered our transmitter station and our transmitters, and I promised that I would help them get some financing through RUS. And so we ultimately we got a $500,000 grant and a $100,000 zero interest loan for them, and that's what bought their classroom equipment. But then we operated and had the transmitters ourselves. We shared transmitters and operated the transmitting site for them, which is they still do. But that made that possible, and that was rewarding because it made these small schools, and we talked about it earlier, every community wants to try to save its schools. But more importantly, it was the students attending those schools. It broadened their curriculum opportunities. And I'll always remember I went out to Leola one time just to see how the system was working out there, and I sat in on a classroom, and there was one student taking industrial ag, or we used to call it ag, but
Yeah.
and he wanted to go into that as a career, into ag science or whatever. Well, Leola had never offered ag before. They couldn't. I mean, they just didn't have enough to where they could afford an instructor. Well, because of this system, he was taking ag from an instructor in Groton. And there was a story one time about a guy walking along the beach picking up starfish after high tide. He was throwing the starfish back, and a guy came up to him and said, how can you hope to make a difference? There's so many starfish. How can you hope you can make a difference by throwing them back? And the guy picked up another one and he tossed it back, and he said, well, I made a difference to that one. And
Yeah.
I always thought about this student out in Leola that, we made a difference to him because he got to, I suppose he went to Brookings, but, he got to prepare. He got some advanced placement courses that he could take for a career in agriculture. So that was rewarding. And that was kind of the two systems together. And then later on, we went on to provide internet service and so forth. And I helped, we partnered with James Valley and created Northern Valley Communications, and I was the first CEO of that and organization. And so we expanded again, under the whole motivation there was I always felt that if rural areas were going to prosper and grow, they shouldn't lack for anything. You should be able to have as much service in the country as you have in town, and that would create both commercial and residential development. And so rural water was important, and I wrote an article in our newsletter right after I first came here that we needed to get rural water, and if we were going to, Brown County was going to grow and prosper. And then jobs. you had to have the infrastructure, and then the jobs would come.
When did you retire?
When?
Yeah.
April 1st, 2005.
Okay.
Yeah.
What have you been doing since then?
Well, we spend a lot of time in the summer over in Potter County, over on the river. We've had some land down on the river breaks and an old cabin there for years. It was in the family. And last summer we rebuilt the old cabin and built a road in there and prepared a building site for a new home, which is under construction now. So we've spent quite a bit of our summers over there doing that, and I'm still on the Vera St. Luke's board. I'm not the president anymore. I'm the past president of it. I'm also on the board of trustees for Presentation College, and I'm on the Education Assistance Corporation board of directors. So I've got board meetings, three different board meetings about every month, and committee meetings. I'm still on a number of committees.
So despite the indication on your shirt that you've been to Arizona, you're not spending winters down there if you're serving on all these boards, right?
We've been spending 2 months.
2 months.
The last
okay.
2 years. We spent February and March last year and this past winter, kind of traveling. I guess this year we spent all the time in Arizona, but the year before we were in Arizona and then down to Texas and kind of worked our way around. But
did you give any advice to your successor? By the way, who is your successor?
He was my operations manager, Jim Moore, and I hired him away from Spink Electric back in 1981. He was a lineman down there, and brought him up to Aberdeen as a line foreman for us, and then later I promoted him to operations manager.
Do you think that's a good policy to bring people up in the organization as opposed to going outside the organization looking for people? You've seen it both ways. You were from outside. And
Well, I think it's good to provide upward
opportunity,
mobility for people in the any organization. It's good that people have that opportunity. I think it depends on the individuals and the situation. And in this case, I think we hired NRECA and went through the entire search process and advertised throughout the whole program, and also even in newspapers and stuff outside the program. But and NRECA has a department set up for that. So we went through that whole process, and in the end, Jim got the job. But I think it was good for him to recognize that they did go through that, and he had to go through that. So he felt like it wasn't just because he had an inside track. He was selected on his merits and qualifications. So I think it worked well in this case. I think he's doing a good job, and I'm hearing that he is, and I'm not surprised at all, because I hope I helped him along the way some. So, but in a different situation, different personalities, it might not be a good thing.
You have to look at the available talent, I suppose.
Different circumstances.
Yeah. Getting down to about the last couple questions here. Would you describe yourself as an optimist or a pessimist? I haven't run into very many pessimists.
No, I'm an eternal optimist. Okay. I'm always looking for something new to get into or create, or as long as my membership wanted it. I guess I didn't try to push something down their throat. But if they wanted it or indicated an interest, I was aggressive, I guess. And
is there anything that I haven't asked you that you'd like to finally add here? Any topic that we didn't get into?
I don't know, Mary, can you think of anything are you still listening?
Oh, halfway, sorry.
Is there anything I should have talked about, or? You know, I would certainly encourage young people to look at a career in cooperatives, and of course, maybe specifically rural electric cooperatives, but all cooperatives. There's a lot happening in the ag and side of things, and the oil and propane business and stuff like that too. There's been a lot of reorganization and with CHS and all of that.
Yep.
Farmers Union in Gettysburg is quite a lot different than what it was when I worked there.
Yep. Yep.
And actually, the station's not even there anymore. But they still have the Northern Plains Cooperative is there. That had the elevator, and they've incorporated the oil and tire business, all that in with it. But
Yeah.
But it was a great career for me. I just have got nothing but good to say about a career in cooperatives.
Okay. We've been visiting with Dennis Hagny. Thank you for participating in the Cooperative Legacy Project.
You're welcome, my